Hello, and welcome to episode 16 of the Wellness Connection podcast with Fiona Kane. My name is Fiona Kane. Today, I'm going to be talking about reading food labels because there's a lot of confusing information out there about it. And I just want to simplify it. You don't need to know everything, but there are some really key things that you need to know to understand what's in the foods that you're buying in the supermarket. The first thing I would say, though, is the best way to eat is to use ingredients. When you use ingredients, you don't need to be able to read ingredients. So when you use something like salmon and avocado and olive oil and broccoli, you don't need to read the ingredients of anything. They are the ingredients. So the simplest way to not even have to think about food labels is to really limit how many things you buy that come in packages and largely just use the ingredients themselves rather than trying to figure out what ingredients are in something. However, we all do still use some packaged products. It's just best to keep them to a minimum, but I will talk about what to look for when you look at those products. So, the first thing I would say is don't believe what's on the front of the package because there's a lot of stretching the truth they can do on the front of the packet or just language that makes something sound better or sound nice. It's called health washing actually because they know that people are aware of health and do care about health. So what they're doing is health washing, and health washing is essentially making sure that you feel good about buying the product, that you feel like if you buy this product, it's going to be healthy for you. So there's a lot of time and effort and marketing strategy put into health washing. So just the front of the packet, be very wary. And especially when the fancier it is, the more I'd be suspicious because if they've got a really big marketing budget, they're Coca-Cola or they're Nestle or there's someone like that, then it's not kind of going to be the local farm produce that has the really, really big marketing budget. So, first of all, just be aware of that. Be aware of health washing, and don't fall for it because they say things like light. And light can mean that there's less fat in something, which is not necessarily a good thing. It depends on what it is. But it can, so for olive oil, it just means it's a lighter color. So light is one of those weird terms that could mean a few different things and doesn't really mean anything necessarily. Just might be more about the flavor. And then they have terms like, no cholesterol. And it's a product that doesn't actually have cholesterol in it anyway. Like it just naturally uh, broccoli doesn't naturally have cholesterol. So if they put no cholesterol on the front of it, it doesn't really mean anything. And by the way, your body makes 80% of your cholesterol because you do need it. And it is important to eat foods that contain cholesterol. That's a whole other topic. So, but they will say something like that because it might sound good. Or they might say low sugar, no sugar, or they might say low fat, no fat, and all of these things. And while I think it's good to be low in sugar, low fat, no fat is a whole other story because low fat, no fat, if it's a product that naturally should contain fat. So, for example, if your product is, if it's yogurt, right? Yogurt naturally contains fat. And it's a natural fat. It's a fat that is supposed to be there. So it's a very healthy fat. So if you're getting a no fat, low fat yogurt, I know some people might need to do it for tummy reasons, for various health reasons. But if you don't have kind of a tummy issue with eating the fat, then I would get the full fat. That's naturally, it's how it should be. It comes with the full fat. The fat has nutrients. The fat actually helps you absorb, your calcium into your bones. So if you eat all low fat stuff and have lots of calcium, you won't necessarily be able to absorb that fat, that calcium into your bones. The fat allows you to do that, and the fat allows you to absorb vitamins A, D, E, and K. So there's lots of sort of things that fat allows your body to do and absorb, and fat is a really important part of the diet. So you don't want low fat or no fat when it comes to things like yogurts or milks or that kind of thing. So I would encourage you to no, don't worry about low fat, no fat stuff. You don't want low fat, no fat stuff. You want food that contains real fats. So the next thing is that so what I do first, the very first thing I do actually, besides ignore the stuff on the front, is you turn it around. And you turn it around, the first thing I look at is the ingredients list. So the ingredients list should contain no more than 5 ingredients. And those ingredients should be things that you recognize as food, that you recognize as ingredients. So it should, if it's a rice cracker, it will probably have rice and it will probably have a bit of salt and it might have a bit of sunflower oil or something like that. But it'll be very specific. It'll just be two, three, four ingredients, right? And remember that ingredients are listed from the highest to the lowest. So if it's a rice cracker, rice will be mentioned first because rice should be the biggest, like the ingredient that is the most of in that product. So be very wary if sugar is one of the top ingredients. If sugar's in the top three ingredients, there's a lot of sugar in that because that just means that it's one of the top ingredients in there, one of the ingredients that they have the most of. So, so I look at the ingredients. Is there more than five? If there is, I'll usually put it back. And then out of those five ingredients, and I'll give you an example, right? In France, bread, they have, I think it's three, four ingredients. It's yeast, uh, salt, wheat, flour, and water. I think that's it, right? So it's those four things. That's what's in bread. And actually, it's by law in France. That is what is in bread. When you look at some breads in Australia, you turn around and look at the packet, there's 75 ingredients in there. So by my count, that's, 71 more ingredients than it might need. And definitely there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that you don't want to be eating. So the next thing is, besides those five ingredients, it's looking at within those ingredients, do you need a biochemistry degree to understand the ingredients list? Because again, if you need a biochemistry degree to understand it, you don't want to be eating that. That's not food, right? So you want to actually be eating ingredients, you want to be eating food. And if you cannot understand the ingredients, you don't want to be eating that. So stay away from things that you can't understand. I often say to my clients, would your great grandmother or great great grandmother, would they recognize it as food? So it's food if your great or great great grandmother would recognize it as food, but if she would not, then it's not food. Put it back, right? So, one, it's ignore the front packaging. Two, it's turn it around straight away. Look at the ingredients. What are the top five ingredients? There should only be five or less ingredients. And is sugar one of the top ones? If it is, put it back. If you need a biochemistry degree to understand it, put it back. The next thing I look for is there vegetable or seed oils in that product? Because I'm not a big fan of those. I generally don't demonize foods. I think everything in moderation. And that moderation or that balance just depends on you, because some people have to be quite strict and other people less so, depending on what's going on with your health, a whole bunch of reasons. I think a little bit of sugar is okay, but some people just don't do well at all if they have it at all, right? And some people might get away with a bit more. I don't know. So it's different for different people. But I don't generally demonize things. However, seed oils are not really real food. They're kind of just this invention that is very damaging to our health. So I don't stress about it if I go out and I go to a pub and they're ordering a meal. I don't stress about the fact that I know they're going to be using some sort of vegetable oil to cook my meal. But I do not have it in my home, and I do not, any products I buy, I make sure there's no vegetable oils in them. So vegetable oils will look like things like, it'll say canola oil, cottonseed oil, it will say sunflower oil. I'm okay if it's a cold pressed sunflower oil, but any kind of other sunflower oil I don't go near because it's been heated and damaged. So all of these oils are really, really poor quality oils that cause inflammation and oxidation, which is kind of inflammation and aging to your body. They are associated with things like macular degeneration, and they're associated with things like insulin resistance. It's one of the drivers of insulin, potential drivers of insulin resistance. So that's why I need to say I stay away from these foods. But the sort of place that you'll find them, most packaged foods will have them. So, for example, if you buy some hummus, there is, I think, one brand that doesn't have them in Australia, but I think that's Triple S last time I looked. But every other brand I could find has it in it. Doesn't mean there's not other brands. That's the ones I found on the supermarket shelf. That's all. So something like Mayonnaise will have it. You really don't need you don't need it in mayonnaise, but it's often in there. And by the way, with the sugar thing, low fat mayonnaise, there was one example where I think there was a mayonnaise, it was low fat, that had something like 28 teaspoons of sugar in it, whereas just the full fat one had something like 6 or 8 teaspoons of sugar. So when they take sugar out, they actually, when they take fat out, they replace it with sugar. I forgot to mention that before. Sugar gives stuff flavor, fat gives stuff flavor. So if you take fat out of a product, it tastes terrible. So the way they fix that is they add sugar into the product. So just remember that low fat often means high sugar, and the natural fat is rarely an issue unless I said you've got a tummy issue or something. But the sugar is an issue because they usually put quite a lot of sugar in there, and often people don't realize. You wouldn't think of mayonnaise as being where sugar was. You might think of Cocoa Pops, but you're not going to think, oh, mayonnaise, there's lots of sugar in this. You just don't, people don't assume that. It's the same with things like barbecue sauce, it's 50% sugar. Tomato sauce is 40% sugar. So we don't realize it's in those places. We think of the obvious places like the chocolate, but we don't think of the sauces and that kind of thing. So, where was I? I was talking about vegetable oils. So, vegetable oils, you will find them in things like cans of fish. So, cans of, whenever you get like a flavored can of fish, so it's like, I don't know, lime and something or other flavor or tomato flavor or whatever it is. But whenever you get any kind of fish that's got a flavor added to it, often there's canola oil in there. Even the ones that say, it'll say something like sardines or tuna in olive oil. And you turn around and have a look, and there is olive oil in there, but it's something like 95% canola oil and 5% olive oil. So they just put a tiny bit of olive oil in it so they can write olive oil on the front, right? So just don't believe them because they have little ways of kind of being able to sound healthier than what they are. The other one that does that, people use that olive oil spread, and they say, "Oh, well, I use the olive oil spread." Well, have you ever turned around and looked at what's in it? It's mostly canola oil, which is margarine, right? Which is nasty because again, it's there's nasty seed oils, and then there's like, I don't know, they probably put the equivalent of a couple of mils of olive oil in there or something. I don't know, and then they call it olive oil spread, and they put a picture of olives on the front. It's got nothing to do with olives. It is margarine dressed up as olive oil. So just be aware that there's little tricks that they have where they, I don't know the rules, but obviously they do know the rules. And you put a certain percentage of something in a product, and you can make it sound healthier. And they have whole teams of nutrition experts and marketing experts who know all those rules, who know how to bend all those rules, and know how to get away with writing all sorts of things on the front of the packet that make it sound better than what it is. Like I said, it's called health washing. So I look for the brands that don't have those. And even just things like, there are brands that don't have those, by the way, so you can find them. And if you do want to have, say you want to have, like I will have lunch and I'll have maybe a tuna salad or something like that, right? And say you want to have a tuna that's got a bit of flavor in it. Well, I will just buy the olive oil that's infused with a flavor. So I will get, the Cobram olive oil have some great infused flavors. They've got chilies and limes and gingers and all sorts of things. Sort of the range varies at different times. But I will keep that handy, if you're doing this in your car, it might be harder, but when you have it at home or have it in the office, I will actually just keep the infused olive oil handy. And so I'll have that, if I want to have flavor in my fish, in my fish salads or whatever, I just use the olive oil to get the flavor rather than the canola oil that comes in the can. So I kind of try and add my own flavor if I can, because I don't trust their flavors, because as soon as they add these flavors, they're adding these oils. So I make sure that there's low sugar in it or no sugar. I'll talk about the sugar amounts in a moment. I make sure there's no vegetable seed oils in there. So again, it's canola oil. It's anything to do with margarine, hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated oils, cottonseed oil. I think I said sunflower, unless it's cold pressed sunflower oil. I'm just trying to think of other words that they use, and I might just say vegetable oil. So it might say something like vegetable, and you think, oh, vegetable oil, that sounds healthy. It's like, oh, is it just like broccoli turned into oil? It's not. It is, when they make these oils, because they're sort of seed oils, they have to they have to really, really put a lot of pressure onto the seed and a lot of heat onto the seed to get the oil out of the seed. And even if the oil was fine to start with, which some of them are, like the sunflower oil, and some of them are not, what happens is in the heating and the pressure, they do a lot of damage to that oil. And the thing about oils is when they are damaged, they are damaging to you. So it's not as simple as, oh, well, it's not as good as the other one. It actually goes from being healthy to being unhealthy. So that's why when you get, say, an olive oil, I will always get cold pressed extra virgin olive oil. That means, first of all, it was pressed that with a cold process. So they didn't heat it to get the oil out, right? So it's cold process, cold pressed. And the second thing is extra virgin means it was the first pressing. So the very first pressing of that oil, that's the oil that came from that first pressing. So then when they press it again and get the next batch of olive oil, that won't be extra virgin, right? Because it's not the first pressing. So essentially that olive has had the least amount of tampering with it to get the oil out. So the oil is still good quality. It's still full of antioxidants and nutrients, and it's still good for you. And that oil will always come in a bottle, and it'll be a glass bottle, a very dark glass bottle, which is really, really important because the dark glass bottle protects it from light and protects it from heat, right? So that is why the difference between when you get an olive oil and it's $15 or however much it is and it's in a dark glass bottle, or when you get some sort of vegetable oil and it's in a clear plastic bottle up the top with the fluorescent lights on it, right? That oil, even if it was good to start with, which it wasn't, but it's been heated and damaged and light damage and all of that. So essentially, that oil is toxic in your body and causes health issues. So I can't emphasize enough when you're looking at the ingredients list, you're looking for these vegetable oils, seed oils, and you're not buying products with them. If your product contains an oil, it should either be the natural oil that thing, like salmon has oil, it should be the oil that it comes in, or it should be something like olive oil. And if it has that, it's fine. But just be very wary if a product, if you can get an oil less version of the product, if that's the only other version, like say you'll get something like ginger and spring water, and then you can just add your own oils, your own good quality oils to that. So just be aware. So I'm looking for sugar, I'm looking for oils. And before I said to you, I'll talk about the amounts of sugar. So that is important to mention. So what I'm looking for is when you, and this is in Australia, I don't know about different product reading labels overseas. I don't quite know what your rules are or what it looks like. But in Australia, they will have sugar listed. And when you look at sugar, this is added sugar. So it's not the whole carb content. And I'm not going to talk about that for the purposes of this video because it's this podcast because it's just not. There's it's a time and place for that subject, but I think that initially people just need to know how to read food labels, and they need to know how to recognize added sugar. So I'm only going to talk about sugar itself, added sugar. So when you look at a label and you look at, so I was talking about looking at the ingredients list before. Now I'm looking at the nutrition table where they've got the amounts in there. So when you look at the nutrition table, there's a couple of things to notice. So one, in Australia, what they do is they have there's two columns. So the first column is comparing per serve of the product. The second column is per 100 mils or 100 grams or whatever the 100 is in that product. It is important to understand this because if it is if you're looking at per serve, every product has a different serve size because a company can make up their own serve size. So, for example, I could say a serving of my jam is a tablespoon. Someone else might say a serving is a teaspoon. So, if you're comparing the servings of these two jams, you think you're comparing the same thing, but one's a tablespoon, one's a teaspoon. Or I could say a serving of my bread is 2 slices, and someone else will say a serving is 1 slice, right? Or a serving of a Mars bar. I could say a serving is half of that Mars bar, and you're assuming it's the whole Mars bar, right? So you really need to look at the per 100. When you're comparing products with each other, you look at the per 100, right? So for starters, comparing anything with anything else, if you're comparing that yogurt with that yogurt, you're comparing the per 100 because you're comparing the same thing, right? And when you're looking at it and you say, okay, that yogurt's got 8 grams of sugar. Oh, that one's got 25 grams of sugar. I know which one I'm going to go for. I'm going to be putting back the 25-gram one. Now, to give you an idea of how much that is, 4 grams is a teaspoon of sugar. So something is 25 grams, it's roughly about 6 teaspoons, right? Now, the World Health Organization, not that I agree with everything they say about health, by the way, that's a whole other story. I do agree a lot on what they say about sugar and sort of guidelines around sugar, though. And they recommend that no more than 6 teaspoons of sugar per day of added sugar for health, or maximum 12. But generally, I'd like to stick around that 6 teaspoons. I think it's not healthy to go beyond that, not for most people. And so that's what they recommend. So if you think about it, if you get yogurt and it's got 25, if that serving that you're having has got 25 grams of sugar in it, a serving shouldn't have that much in it, but read it, you never know. But anyway, you've just got to look at it for as your daily sugar, how much you're having. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. That sugar film, it's really worth watching. It's about 6 or 7 years old now, but it's a very good film. I still am like a that sugar film, that sugar movement ambassador, and the film is still as valid as it was then, so it's hasn't sort of aged really. And just go to thatsugarfilm.com.au or maybe .com, I don't know. If you Google that sugar film, you'll find it. Really worth watching. Anyway, in that film, Damon Gummo, he was eating sugar. He was eating, I think it was the equivalent of 40 teaspoons of sugar per day, which in Australia at the time was average. So that's what he was using it as. And what he was doing is he wasn't eating junk food. He was eating food that people consider to be healthy. So he deliberately wasn't having ice cream and cola and chocolate bars. He was actually having food that people see as being healthy, which is kind of cereals and juices and low fat yogurts and that kind of thing. And by the time he finished his breakfast on the first day, I think he had reached, I could be wrong now, it's been a little while since I've seen it, but I think it was something like 26 teaspoons. And that was a juice and a bowl of cereal, a cereal that advertises itself to be healthy and promotes it to people for weight loss and health and all that sort of stuff, and some low fat yogurt. So that was just in one breakfast. So sugar, there can be a lot of sugar in things that you don't realize. And again, I was talking about the mayonnaise before. I was talking about the tomato sauce and the barbecue sauce, that sort of thing. Sugar is in places where you don't realize it is. So because it's in places where you don't realize it is, you can be having all the health foods and not realizing you're eating an awful lot of sugar. So I think it is a good idea to look at your products and compare them and look and learn which ones have more sugar and keep it to a minimum. Ultimately, it's not really about, look, you choose what you do and don't want to eat. That's up to you. But my argument is that, if you're having a chocolate bar, you're not worrying about the low sugar, you're just enjoying the chocolate bar. Fair enough. That's a choice. But if you're having the low fat yogurt, you're doing that as a health choice. And to not realize that it's not a health choice, I think is kind of, well, I think it's a bit criminal, really, that they can make people think they're doing a healthy thing when they're not. Same thing goes for things like muesli bars. Oh my God, especially the more fruit that it's got in it, the worse it is. The other thing to say about sugar as well is as an ingredient. It's a bit sneaky. There's something like 70 different names for sugar. I think they've got on that sugar film on their website, I think they've got some sort of graphic or some sort of list there. But generally speaking, it'll either say sugar, or it'll be any word that ends in ose. So it'll be sucrose, glucose, fructose, maltose, whatever. It'll end in ose, or it will have a name like syrup. There'll be some sort of, like, it'll be golden syrup or maple syrup, or it will have some name like it will say something to do with fruit. So it might be fruit syrup, or it might be fruit. I can't remember the language they use, but they use the word fruit, sort of some kind of mashed up fruit sounding name, or fruit concentrate maybe. Fruit concentrate is sugar, right? So just be aware that sometimes you look at a product and it will have 4 different ingredients that are all different variations of sugar. It's a lot of sugar in that food. So know how to look for sugar in products and know how to look at how much is there. I prefer to get the product without all of the sugar and then add my own berries to it, add my own, if I want to have a little bit of honey, I'll have a little bit of honey, but I'll add that to the food myself. I know how much I'm having. So that's a way of looking at it. So, anyway, I think that that's kind of covered it. Essentially, just in ingredients rather than food that has ingredients. When you do get food that has ingredients, 5 or less ingredients, nothing that you don't understand or that your great grandmother wouldn't recognize as food. Be aware of how much sugar you're having. Be aware if there's any vegetable oils in there. And the last thing I would say is just this can be really overwhelming if you haven't thought of any of this before. And what I would say is just do one product at a time. So next time you're changing over your tomato sauce, or you next time you're buying a can of tuna, look for the better brand and then just start getting that one. And then once you're in the habit of doing that, you've done the tuna this week, do the tomato sauce next week. So don't get really stressed about it. You don't have to throw everything away, but I would just say one at a time. Just make it your goal to one at a time change over so that you know eventually your pantry is full of products that are supporting your health. But largely, if you're eating ingredients and not with foods that have ingredients, you'll be doing better. Anyway, I hope that was really useful. You can let me know, give me any feedback, and I will talk to you again next week. Thanks. Bye.